Are you certain you want to proceed this way? Jonathan Ellis's voice was calm, but the weight behind it made the hallway still. The guard hesitated, one hand resting on the mic clipped to his shoulder. The floor manager shifted beside him, not yet realizing that in less than 15 minutes, both their careers would be on the line. No, how did it get here? You can't be in this hallway, sir. VIP owners only. The words had cut through the hum of the Super Bowl crowd like a referee's whistle in sudden silence. Guests slowed, glancing toward the man in the tailored tuxedo standing center on the deep red carpet. Jonathan had paused, not out of surprise, but because he'd heard this tone before in boardrooms, lobbies, and lounges where someone decided he didn't belong. Tonight, under stadium lights, it was happening again. The hallway to the owner's box gleamed with framed championship photos. Jonathan, 6'1", navy tuxedo perfectly pressed, black Oxfords polished to glass, looked like he'd stepped from a GQ spread. Sir, the guard repeated, I need to see your special invitation. Jonathan reached into his jacket, producing a black metal access card etched with the team logo and a cream envelope embossed with the NFL shield. The guard took them lightly, scanning. Could be fake. We've seen scams before. Jonathan's posture didn't shift. Of course, take your time. The guard's mic crackled. Possible counterfeit pass at north entrance. A floor manager in a charcoal suit appeared, eyes flicking over Jonathan like checking inventory. Second ID, please. Jonathan opened a slim wallet, showing a driver's license and a gold NFL credentials badge. The manager returned them without eye contact, unusual to come alone. Owners usually have an entourage. I'm here for the game, Jonathan replied. Come. The radio buzzed again. Escort to general seating until verification is complete. The guard stepped forward, gesturing toward the stairs. This way, sir. Jonathan's gaze slid past them to the frosted glass doors just 30 feet away, doors leading to the box he had designed, paid for, and filled with his own guests. The roar of the stadium beyond was a low drumbeat in his chest. Before we continue, imagine this happened to you, in a place you rightfully owned. What would you say in that moment? Share it in the comments, because your words might be the ones that inspire someone else to speak up. Now, back to Jonathan. Jonathan's phone vibrated. He drew out a silver-edged device, pressing one button. Caroline. He said, low and even, it's begun. Activate Stadium Protocol 7. Log every word. Yes, Mr. Ellis, came the reply. Board is online. Cameras and mics are live. Jonathan slipped the phone back into his jacket. The guard waited for him to move, but Jonathan stayed anchored to the carpet. In 15 minutes, those doors wouldn't just open. The entire stadium would know exactly who he was and why this moment would be the last time anyone tried to escort him out of his own house. The guard's hand was still hovering, unsure whether to guide him away or keep stalling for backup. The hallway had shifted. People weren't just walking by anymore, they were watching. A few phones were already lifted, subtle at first, then bolder as whispers passed down the carpeted corridor. Jonathan Ellis didn't so much as glance at them. His eyes were fixed on the frosted glass doors 30 feet ahead, the ones leading to the owner's box. He had spent millions to design plush leather seating. Private chef, panoramic view of the Super Bowl field. His guests were in there now, no doubt wondering why their host hadn't arrived. The floor manager stepped closer, trying to fill the silence. Sir, this is for your safety as well as ours. High-profile events attract impersonators. We can't be too careful. Jonathan let a faint, almost amused breath escape. And yet here we are. The guard's radio hissed again. A new voice. Copy. Stand by for escort team. From the corner, a young concessions runner in a stadium polo hesitated, eyes flicking between Jonathan and the staff blocking him. He shifted his tray under one arm, then spoke quietly but firmly. I know who that is. The floor manager shot him a look sharp enough to cut. Get back to work. But it was too late. A woman in a silver jersey and high heels turned to the person next to her. Isn't that Ellis, the owner? The murmur spread fast, feeding itself. The guard's jaw tightened. Sir, I'm asking one more time, please come with us until we can verify. Jonathan's hand slid back into his tuxedo jacket, pulling out his phone once more. He didn't raise his voice, but the words carried. "Caroline, confirm the board's on the line." "Confirmed," came the crisp reply through his earpiece. "They've been watching the feed for the last 2 minutes. Your audio is live." The floor manager stiffened. "Feed? What feed?" Jonathan met his eyes for the first time. "The one recording every word you've said since I stepped into this hallway." A ripple of reaction moved through the onlookers. The guard took a half step back. "You can't record without permission," the manager said, but it lacked conviction. "In this building," Jonathan replied, "I don't need permission." For a moment, no one moved. Somewhere below, the crowd's cheer swelled likely a big play on the field, but up here, the tension was its own game. The young concessions runner spoke again, louder this time. "He owns the team. That's his box." Jonathan turned slightly, acknowledging the voice without breaking his calm. "Thank you." Before the floor manager could retake control, Caroline's voice returned in his ear. "Mr. Ellis, do you want to escalate to phase 2? His gaze shifted back to the frosted doors. "Not yet," he said. "I'm giving them one last opportunity to choose wisely." He stepped forward once, closing the distance between himself and the staff. The guard didn't stop him. "This," Jonathan said quietly, "is the moment you decide whether this ends as a misunderstanding or as a very public lesson." The hallway was silent, but for the roar of 70,000 fans below, and in that silence, every eye turned to the staff blocking the path, waiting to see which choice they'd make. Because everyone could feel it, whatever came next would be heard far beyond these walls. The pause broke not with an apology, but with another challenge. The floor manager straightened his tie, as if the motion alone could reassert control. "We're following protocol," he said, louder now, his voice carrying to the growing audience. "Without verified credentials, you can't be up here." Jonathan's head tilted slightly, the faintest gesture of disbelief. "You've had both my credentials in your hands. They could be forged," the manager replied. The guard, emboldened, took a half step forward. "Sir, we can walk you down to guest services." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. Guest services, the words weren't shouted, but they sliced through the corridor. Someone in the watching crowd let out a short laugh, the kind that slips when disbelief tips into outrage. More phones came up. A man in a tailored blazer whispered to his companion, "That's Ellis." "This is insane." The guard glanced at the floor manager, unsure. The manager ignored him and looked straight at Jonathan. "If you're truly who you claim, you'll understand we have to be cautious." "I understand caution," Jonathan said evenly. "What you're practicing isn't caution." Caroline's voice came through his earpiece again, soft but deliberate. "Board members are messaging me, Mr. Ellis. They've confirmed live monitoring of this conversation. All for our online." Jonathan adjusted the cuff of his shirt, his gold watch catching the overhead light. "Make a note," he said quietly into the mic. "Every word, every refusal, every time they implied I don't belong." "Yes, sir." Logged. The floor manager frowned. "Who are you talking to?" Jonathan didn't answer him. Instead, he looked past the staff to the frosted doors again, now reflecting the shapes of curious guests pressing against the glass from inside the owner's box. His guests, his box. The young concessions runner from earlier edged closer, his tray empty now. "You're making a mistake," he told the guard under his breath. The guard stiffened, caught between orders and the growing weight of the crowd's perception. "We have procedures," he muttered, but the conviction was gone. "Procedures are there to protect the organization," Jonathan said, his voice low but carrying. "Right now, you're protecting your own assumptions." A woman in a red dress, clearly a corporate sponsor, stepped from the back of the crowd. "That's Jonathan Ellis. He spoke at our charity gala last spring." She looked directly at the floor manager. "Are you seriously blocking him?" The manager's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, we..." Jonathan cut in, still composed. "It's all right. They're determined to finish this the hard way." He touched his earpiece again. "Caroline, proceed to phase 2. Confirmed. Internal alert sent. Stadium security command notified. We're now in executive override." The manager blinked. "Executive what?" Jonathan's gaze locked with his. "You'll find out." The guard took another step back, uncertainty finally breaking through his posture. The crowd leaned in, sensing the shift. Below them, the stadium's jumbotron flashed a timeout graphic. But up here, no one was looking at the field anymore. All eyes were on the man in the navy tuxedo, standing unshaken in the middle of the red carpet, waiting for the next move, one that could turn this hallway standoff into the night's biggest headline. Jonathan didn't move. The pause between phase 2 being activated and the next sound felt stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring. Then, faint but clear, came the chime of the stadium's internal PA system. A measured female voice spoke over hidden speakers in the hallway. Executive security protocol initiated. All activity within owner's level is now under live review. The floor manager's expression flickered confusion, giving way to alarm. What does that mean? Jonathan adjusted his cufflinks with a deliberate calm. It means the people you answer to are listening, and they're not impressed. The guard shifted his weight. Sir, I didn't mean any. Jonathan raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence without even looking his way. His attention stayed on the floor manager. You had a dozen ways to handle this quietly. Instead, you chose public humiliation. For that, I thank you. Thank you, the manager repeated, his voice brittle. Yes, Jonathan said, because now every person in this hallway, every executive watching in the control room, and every one of my guests behind that glass will know exactly what kind of gatekeeping happens at my stadium. From inside the owner's box, a guest pressed their hand against the glass, watching. Behind Jonathan, murmurs rolled through the growing crowd. The woman in the red dress folded her arms, openly glaring at the manager. The young concessions runner stood with his empty tray at his side, refusing to walk away. The radio on the manager's hip crackled sharply. Command here. Confirmado, you have Jonathan Ellis detained? The manager froze, color draining from his face. He pressed the mic to his mouth. We have a guest claiming to be. The voice from command cut him off. Not claiming. He is. Release him immediately. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Jonathan's lips. I think you have your answer. The guard stepped back, his hand falling away from his belt. The tension in the hallway shifted, like a current changing direction. Before anyone could speak again, Caroline's voice came through Jonathan's earpiece. Mr. Ellis, the board chair is requesting to go to full lockdown if you want it. Jonathan's gaze swept the faces in front of him, lingering on the floor manager. Not yet. Let's see if courtesy can be salvaged. He took a slow step forward. The guard moved aside instantly. The floor manager hesitated, then stepped back as well, the fight draining from his posture. Jonathan stopped just short of the frosted doors. In the next 30 seconds, he said evenly, you could open these doors, apologize, and keep your job. Or you could stand there, and I'll make this the shortest career you've ever had. Silence, the hum of the stadium outside Preston, like the sound of a wave building before it breaks. Jonathan glanced at his watch. 20 seconds. The crowd held its breath. The doors to the owner's box waited, just an arm's length away, while the man who owned them stood in perfect stillness, letting every second weigh heavy on the men who had tried to block his way. 10 seconds, Jonathan said, his voice calm but with a finality that coiled through the air. The floor manager's Adam's apple shifted. He glanced at the guard, then at the crowd. The young concessions runner stood unmoving, eyes locked on him, while the woman in the red dress shook her head slowly, as if to say, do you really want to go down like this? From the frosted glass ahead, more faces were visible now, Jonathan's guests, pressing closer to see what was holding him outside. One of them mouthed something. What's going on? The guard spoke under his breath. Sir, maybe we should. Jonathan didn't let him finish. 5 seconds. The floor manager exhaled hard, as if surrendering something heavy. His hand reached for the handle. Hesitated and froze when his radio erupted again. Command to Manager Grant. The voice barked. Owner's orders. Open that door now. And report to Security HQ immediately after. Gasps moved through the hallway like wind through leaves. Jonathan didn't move. He simply raised an eyebrow, watching the manager's every motion. Grant pulled the handle. The doors opened with a soft hiss of pressure, revealing the warm glow of the owner's box, plush leather seating, glass panels framing the roaring stadium beyond. Every head inside turned toward the doorway. Jonathan stepped forward. crossing the threshold with the kind of grace that made the crowd outside lean unconsciously with him inside. His guests rose to greet him, but Jonathan stopped just inside the doorway and turned back toward the hall. "Grant," he said, voice level but carrying, "you'll wait there until I'm finished." The manager swallowed, nodding stiffly. Jonathan's gaze swept the hall one last time, landing on the young concessions runner. "What's your name?" "Eli, sir," the young man said, startled. "Eli," Jonathan replied, "you'll be hearing from my office. People who speak up when it's not safe to are the ones I want working for me." Eli's eyes widened. "Yes, sir, thank you." Jonathan turned fully into the box, but before the doors could close, he spoke again, this time to the guard. "You two, report to HR tomorrow morning. We'll discuss where you go from here." The guard nodded, almost in relief. Caroline's voice came softly through Jonathan's earpiece. "Board chair says we're still greenlit for full lockdown if you want to proceed." Jonathan's eyes followed the crowd in the stadium below, the game still frozen in a timeout. "Not yet," he murmured. "We'll give them one last quarter to remember why the stadium runs the way it does." The doors eased shut, sealing the box from the hallway drama. But outside, the story was already spreading through texts, through posts, through whispers, how the man in the navy tuxedo had stood his ground, counted down seconds, and walked into his own box like a king reclaiming his throne. The door's latch clicked shut, soft enough to be polite, firm enough to signal finality. Inside, the warmth of the owner's box wrapped around Jonathan, the low hum of discreet conversation, the faint scent of aged leather, and the panoramic sweep of the stadium under the blaze of Super Bowl lights. Jonathan, a tall man in a charcoal suit, stepped forward, one of the minority shareholders. Hand extended. "We thought you got caught up with media." Jonathan accepted the handshake, his expression measured, something like that. Laughter rippled among the guests, but only lightly. They could feel an edge under his tone, a weight that didn't belong to small talk. A server approached with a silver tray of champagne flutes. Jonathan waved it away gently. "Later," he said. "Not yet." From the glass wall, he watched the field. Players milled during the timeout. Coaches clustered over clipboards. Cameras drifted across the sidelines. But in his periphery, he saw movement in the hallway. Grant still standing exactly where Jonathan had left him. Posture stiff, the crowd thinning, but not gone. Some lingered, clearly waiting for more. Jonathan's phone buzzed twice in his pocket. Caroline. He excused himself from a cluster of sponsors and moved toward a quieter corner of the box. "Yes, the board chair wants confirmation. Do you want to proceed with the public statement tonight, or wait until tomorrow?" Jonathan's eyes drifted to the live broadcast feed on the box's private screen. A split view of the game and interior stadium cams. One showed Grant in the hall, speaking into his radio with the tension of a man cornered. "Tonight," Jonathan said, "but not during the game. We're going to time it with the exit flow. Maximum visibility." "Understood." "And the guard?" Jonathan considered. "Keep him on. I'll decide after I hear his account." As he ended the call, a sponsor's wife approached, smiling brightly. "Jonathan, I have to ask, was that really you they were stopping out there?" His eyes softened a fraction. "It was." Her smile faltered. "Unbelievable. In your own stadium." "It happens more often than you'd think," Jonathan said. "And not just to me." There was a pause, not awkward, but heavy. Then the announcer's voice boomed through the glass, and we're back. The crowd erupted. The field came alive again. Jonathan turned back toward his seat at the center of the box, but his mind wasn't on the game. It was on the hallway, on the seconds that had ticked by while Grant hesitated, and on the fact that everyone who'd been there would be telling that story before the night was over. Some stories die quickly. This one had already grown legs, and Jonathan intended to let it run. The third quarter rolled on beneath the floodlights, but Jonathan's focus never left the subtle flickers on the box's private monitor. Each feed was a different slice of his stadium concourses, entrances, luxury suites, all watched over by the same network he'd ordered installed his first year as majority owner. On one camera, Grant was still in the hallway, posture deflated, glancing now and then toward the closed doors of the owner's box. The guard leaned against the wall a few steps away, no longer posturing, hands clasped in front of him. The crowd that had lingered earlier had thinned, but a few stubborn witnesses still lingered, chatting in low voices. Jonathan's guest to his right, a retired quarterback and franchise legend, leaned in. "I heard something went down outside. You all right?" Jonathan kept his eyes on the screen. "It's under control. You gonna tell me what happened?" the man asked with a grin that tried to lighten the moment. Jonathan allowed himself the faintest smile. "Later." The camera feeds shifted. One view showed the command center stadium security brass headsets on, eyes darting between monitors. Jonathan recognized two of his own appointees in the room, both veterans in law enforcement. They were speaking to someone off-screen, their expressions serious. Caroline's voice came through his earpiece again. "Sir, local press is already hearing about an incident involving the owner on the luxury level. No footage leaked yet, but people are talking." "Let them," Jonathan replied. "Truth will hold." Across the room, the minority shareholder from earlier approached again, this time with a folded piece of paper in hand. "This was just handed to me by an usher outside. Someone in the hall passed it through." Jonathan unfolded it, a note, scrawled in quick block letters. "I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were. It wasn't signed, but he didn't need it to be." The guard's apology had arrived before the meeting Jonathan had promised HR. He tucked the note into his inside pocket without comment. "Thank you," he told the shareholder. From the field below, the roar of the crowd swelled a breakaway run toward the end zone. Guests surged to their feet, shouting, champagne flutes clinking. Jonathan rose with them, but his cheers were quieter. His mind split between the touchdown and the clock ticking toward the game's end. Because when those final seconds ran out, and the fans began streaming toward the exits, he would act, not to punish in anger, but to ensure the lesson landed where it was meant to in the culture of his stadium, and in the memory of everyone who'd witnessed that hallway standoff. Jonathan sat back down, eyes returning to the monitors. The game would end soon enough. But for Grant and the others, the night was far from over. The fourth quarter began with a kick return, the crowd roaring as the ball arched under the stadium lights. In the owner's box, conversation ebbed and flowed around Jonathan, but his attention kept drifting to the clock. 12 minutes of game time left, less than an hour until the concourses would be flooded with departing fans and witnesses. Caroline's voice returned in his earpiece, low enough not to draw notice. "Sir, internal security has finished their preliminary review. The footage from the hallway is clean. Angles are good. Audio is clear. You're fully covered if you want to release it." Jonathan's gaze slid to the private monitor. One feed replayed the moment Grant blocked his way, the guard standing rigid, the crowd beginning to form. Another showed the young concessions runner, Eli, stepping forward to speak on his behalf. "Archive the full reel," Jonathan said. "We'll decide on release after I speak to them directly." "Yes, sir. Also, the stadium's PR head is in the command center. She's asking if you intend to address staff before they clock out tonight." Jonathan allowed himself a quiet exhale. "She knows me well. Yes." Below, the game tightened a field goal, narrowing the score. Guests leaned forward in their seats, voices rising in shared anticipation. Jonathan stood for a moment at the back of the box, looking out over the stadium he had poured years into. Every beam, every pane of glass, every policy was under his name. And still, just an hour ago, he had been treated like an intruder. The scoreboard ticked down. 10 minutes. His phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number. It read simply, "I'd like to explain." Please, no signature, but the context was obvious. "Grant." Jonathan typed back two words after final. Time bled away in bursts of play and commercial breaks. At the 2-minute warning, the crowd's energy reached fever pitch. Jonathan's guests were on their feet again, shouting over the din. He remained seated, eyes on the monitor showing the luxury-level corridor. Grant was gone now, but Eli still lingered near a wall, chatting with another staffer. The guard was speaking quietly to a supervisor, his posture no longer defensive, but subdued. Caroline's voice again, "We're ready when you are. The board chair has cleared the executive announcement for post-game. Security will keep the staff on level until you arrive." Jonathan rose, buttoning his tuxedo jacket with unhurried precision. Good. I'll be there as soon as the clock hits 0. On the field, the final whistle would soon decide the champion. But in Jonathan's mind, the real outcome of the night would be measured not in yards or points, but in the faces of the people he was about to address and whether they understood that. The owner they'd once tried to turn away was the same man who had built the house they worked in. The scoreboard hit 0. Confetti cannons burst in the corners of the field, gold and silver streamers tumbling into the night air. The crowd roared, a wall of sound that shook the glass of the owner's box. Jonathan's guests erupted in cheers, some embracing, others filming the chaos on their phones. He clapped politely, offered a few congratulatory nods, but his mind was already moving elsewhere. The game was over. Now it was his turn. Caroline's voice came through, crisp as ever, level secured, sir. Staff are being held in the corridor outside the box. Grant is there, the guard too, and Eli. Jonathan glanced once more out at the stadium, the players celebrating at midfield. Cameras flashing from every angle. He turned from the view, straightened his tuxedo jacket, and walked toward the exit. When the doors opened, the hallway was quieter than he'd expected. The remaining crowd of spectators had been moved along, leaving only staff and a few senior security personnel. Grant stood stiffly near the wall, his face pale, but his jaw set. The guard was beside him, eyes down. Eli was there too, hands clasped in front of him, watching Jonathan closely. Jonathan stepped into the center of the hall. Grant, he said evenly, step forward. The floor manager obeyed, though his movements lacked the confidence from earlier. I'm going to give you a chance to speak, Jonathan said. Not to excuse yourself, but to explain what you thought you were doing when you blocked the owner of this stadium from entering his own box. Grant swallowed hard. Sir, I was trying to follow protocol. We've had incidents before, and you decided protocol meant ignoring credentials, identification, and the fact that half this level knows my face. Jonathan finished for him. Grant's eyes dropped. It wasn't personal. Jonathan's voice stayed calm, but steel lined every word. That's the problem. It's never personal for the person doing it. It's just procedure until it happens to them. He turned his attention to the guard. And you? Did you question the order you were given? The guard's voice was quiet. No, sir. I should have. I see that now. Jonathan nodded once. You'll both report to HR tomorrow morning. Decisions will be made then. Then he looked at Eli. And you spoke up when you didn't have to. That's not nothing. Eli shifted, unsure how to respond. I couldn't watch it happen. That, Jonathan said, is exactly the kind of instinct the stadium should run on. He stepped back, letting his words settle. The confetti was still drifting somewhere beyond the glass. The night wasn't over, not for them, and not for him. Stay here, he told them. You'll hear what comes next in front of everyone. And with that, Jonathan walked toward the central concourse, ready to turn a hallway standoff into a message the entire stadium staff would remember. The central concourse of the luxury level was still buzzing with post-game energy. Staff moved briskly to manage the exiting VIPs, but a call from security had already begun to ripple through the earpiece's owner's address. All staff remain in position. Jonathan stepped into the open space just beyond the champagne bar, where the view of the field was framed by a wide glass arch. Behind him, Grant, the guard, and Eli followed, flanked by two security supervisors. Caroline was waiting near a tall cocktail table, tablet in hand. She leaned in. PA system is patched to all luxury suites and staff channels. We're ready when you are. Jonathan took a slow breath, scanning the faces gathering around him, ushers in crisp black vests, catering crews still in their aprons, security personnel standing at attention. Some had already heard whispers of what happened. Others were still piecing it together from the sight of Grant and the guards standing apart, like defendants waiting for a verdict. When the last cluster of staff arrived, Jonathan stepped forward, his polished shoes silent against the carpet. He didn't need a microphone. The space had gone still. Tonight, he began, we hosted one of the biggest events in sports. Thousands of guests came here expecting excellence, and for most of them, that's what they got. He let the words breathe before continuing. But in one hallway, on this very level, Something else happened. A man wearing a tuxedo and carrying the highest access credentials available was stopped. Repeatedly, doubted, questioned, moved toward the stairs as though he didn't belong. Murmurs moved through the group. Jonathan didn't raise his voice. That man was me. Silence dropped over the concourse like a heavy curtain. Eyes darted toward Grant and the guard. Eli stood a little straighter. I own this team. I built this level. I sign the checks that pay for every brick and beam you work under. And still, I was treated as if I had no right to be here. He let the weight of that sink in before he spoke again. If that can happen to the owner, think about what it means for any guest who doesn't fit someone's idea of who belongs. A server in the back shifted uncomfortably. A young usher looked down at his shoes. Jonathan's tone softened, but his words carried steel. This isn't about me being recognized. It's about every person who walks through these doors, being treated with dignity first before credentials, before assumptions, before appearances. He glanced at Eli. Some of you already understand that, and you act on it, even when it's not easy. Then he turned his eyes back to the group as a whole. We're going to change how we operate. We're going to train better, listen better, and judge less, because this stadium will reflect the values we claim to stand for, or it won't have my name on it at all. The words hung in the air, unchallenged. Outside, the stadium lights still blazed. But inside this space, something had shifted, and Jonathan knew the real victory of the night had just been claimed. Jonathan let the silence settle, not rushing to fill it. The staff stood rooted, their faces a mix of unease, reflection, and in a few, something closer to resolve. He took a step to the side, giving them room to look at one another. Some of you may think this is just about knowing who the owner is, he said, his tone even. It's not. I don't expect anyone to memorize faces. I do expect every one of you to treat people as if they belong until proven otherwise. Not the other way around. The guard shifted his weight, but Jonathan's eyes didn't linger on him. They swept the entire group. I built this stadium for the fans, for the game, and for the city. Every guest who walks in here is a part of that. If you can't see that, then you can't work here. He motioned for Eli to step forward. The young man looked startled, glancing at his fellow staff before moving to Jonathan's side. This is Eli, Jonathan said, his voice carrying. When I was stopped in that hallway, he didn't know me personally. He didn't have a stake in what happened. But he spoke up. He used his voice when it mattered. Jonathan placed a hand on Ellie's shoulder. Starting tomorrow, he's moving to guest relations. Direct line to my office, because I need people in this building who don't wait for someone else to fix what's wrong. A ripple went through the group, surprise from some, quiet nods from others. Ellie's face flushed, but he stood a little taller. Thank you, sir, he managed. Jonathan turned back to the crowd. That's how quickly things can change here. Good actions are rewarded. Poor judgment is not. His gaze landed on Grant and the guard. You'll both meet with HR tomorrow. Decisions will be final. Until then, you're off the schedule. Grant opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it. The guard gave a small nod. Jonathan straightened, his presence filling the space. When you wear this badge, you represent more than a job. You represent this team, this city, and yes, me. You don't have to like me. You don't even have to agree with me. But you will treat people with dignity in my stadium. The murmurs had quieted. The only sound was the distant echo of departing fans in the main concourse. Jonathan gave one final look around. I expect better, starting now. With that, he stepped back, signaling Caroline to wrap the meeting. The staff began to disperse. Some in thought, others already whispering to each other. Jonathan watched them go, knowing the message had landed where it needed to. This wasn't about a single night, or even about him. It was about resetting the standard no one in this building could ignore again. The concourse slowly emptied, footsteps fading into the distant echo of the stadium's main exits. Outside the glass arch, the field crew was already at work, sweeping confetti into neat piles under the still bright floodlights. Jonathan remained where he stood, hands clasped loosely in front of him, watching the last few staff filter away. Caroline stepped up beside him. That was the clearest I've heard you in months, she said quietly. It needed to be, Jonathan replied. His voice was calm again. the tension of the night settling into a steady, deliberate resolve. They'll remember it, and if they don't, I'll remind them. Eli lingered a few steps away, unsure whether to leave. Jonathan turned toward him. You start tomorrow. I want you shadowing guest relations for 2 weeks. Then we'll talk about your role long term. Yes, sir, Eli said. His voice carried a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. And thank you for keeping your word. Jonathan's expression softened just enough. If I don't keep my word, Eli, I have no business owning this place. Eli nodded and left, the sound of his sneakers fading into the quiet. Jonathan glanced toward the far end of the concourse, where Grant and the guard were walking under escort toward the service elevators. There was no malice in his gaze, only finality. Actions had consequences, and this was theirs. Caroline checked her tablet. Press is still fishing for a statement. Do you want to address it now? Jonathan considered for a beat, then shook his head. Not tonight. Let the story breathe on its own. They'll talk, and when they do, the truth will carry more weight than anything I could put in a soundbite. They began walking back toward the owner's box. The stadium was quieter now, the noise of celebration replaced by the low hum of cleanup crews and the occasional metallic clink of dismantled equipment. Inside the box, the last of his guests were gathering their things. A few came over to offer handshakes and compliments on the speech they'd overheard through the PA. Jonathan accepted each one with a measured nod, but didn't linger in conversation. His mind was already moving to the weeks ahead, retraining programs, revised protocols, and a meeting with the board to ensure no part of tonight's lesson was lost. Before leaving, he stepped once more to the glass wall overlooking the field. The turf was littered with scraps of color, the scoreboard still glowing with the night's final score. He thought of the moment in the hallway, the way the guard's hand had hovered at his shoulder, the way Grant's eyes had calculated and doubted, and he thought of how quickly their certainty had cracked when the truth arrived. Jonathan allowed himself one quiet, satisfied breath. Then he turned from the glass, the stadium lights gleaming across the navy of his tuxedo. This was his house, and after tonight, no one in it would ever forget that.